So I'll explain why I wrote it. I'll tell my story to be distinguished from some of the things that are in the book that never really happened to me versus others that did. After all, it is a novel, so it's a, characters are composite characters representing things that I wanted to communicate to the readers. So, and by the way, no book event is complete without flowers. Thank you, Lori. That was very nice. And also without props. So this may be actually a good place for me to start. So I brought two things to show you. These are, as the name of the book says, these are tear catchers. So this first one is actually a real antique one that my father actually commissioned someone to go find it in the bazaars in Tehran. And this obviously is an original, but because the name of the book is a ruby tear catcher, I couldn't exactly, the blue tear catcher just didn't cut it. So, back when we were in Chicago, I found a glass artist. Actually, I had a couple of them make it, and I finally settled on this one. So this is a replica that he made, and told me that red is the most difficult color to build with, to create glass art with. But so he tried and then he made one, and he said, "I'm not making anymore because it's really hard to make." So, the reference to the tear catcher, I want to explain for those of you who don't know, who haven't read it on the website or haven't heard me talk about it. Reference to the tear catcher is because it really symbolizes what I wanted the book to be about, what I wanted the message and the story to be about, which is that despite our differences, we're really more alike than we are different. And the symbolism here ties back to the days of in ancient Persia, when the sultans would go to war. They gave a tear catcher to each of their wives in the harem. And the wives would cry while he was at war for 5, 6 months, and tears would be collected. And then upon his return, the wife who had cried the most became the favored wife. So just for demonstration purposes, in case it's not obvious, this is how you are supposed to use this vessel. So besides ancient Persia, though, there have been references to tear catchers and tear bottles in other places. In the Old Testament, in Psalm 56, verse 8, as David prays to God, he makes reference to a tear bottle, a tear catcher. So if you want to, you can look up 56:8 and read about that. And rumor has it that in the apocryphal books, Mary Magdalene carried a tear bottle to the tomb of Jesus, mourning his death. In the Roman times, mourners, who were typically women, would walk around the deceased, carrying these things, crying, wailing, collecting their tears, and in some cases they were paid, so the louder they cried and wailed, and the more tears they collected, the more they got paid. Then in the Victorian times, this was used as a means to, so if someone lost a person who was dear to them, they would cry into the tear bottles and put a stopper on it, and then when the idea was that when the tears evaporated, their mourning period was finally over. So the point of all of this is that the symbolism of this is it ties us together, regardless of whether you hail from the Middle East, from the West, from any place in the world, and regardless of your religious background and convictions and beliefs, regardless of country culture complete, that we really are more similar, we are the same, and that symbolizes our oneness. So explaining why the book was written kind of takes me back to telling you a little bit about myself and why I chose to do this. So my background is this: I was born and raised in Tehran to very nice parents, and we lived what I would call a privileged life. We had no needs, we had everything we needed, we had freedom of, in many sorts. I would say that the Iran that I grew up in until I was 17 and migrated to the United States was more or less the same as probably your life here in this country, where there was, I could dress the way I wanted, I could eat what I wanted, go where I wanted. There was no freedom of speech, because under the Shah's rule, of course, you know, this is a kingdom. His father and 2,500 years of having a kingdom in Iran, those things were ingrained. And I remember my dad saying, just don't get involved in politics, keep your head down, do your own thing, stay below the radar, and you'll be all right. That's very interesting, dichotomy from being in this country where I am now learning about politics more than I ever cared to, and I'm probably more involved and probably will become more involved because I think it is meaningful. But I have the right to do that. I don't have to live in fear for doing that. While in Iran, you did have to live in fear because the Shah is reported to have been quite, he wasn't a nice man when it came to his dissidents, let's put it that way. So I grew up, the vision, and this was part of the message that I also wanted to deliver. Iran got on the map back when the Americans were taken hostage in 1979 during the Islamic Revolution. Prior to that, when I first came to the US and I was in college, people would say, well, where are you from? From my name, if nothing else. I'd say, I'm from Persia. And they'd say, where's that? Seriously. It was a couple years later that everybody knew where that was. So Iran kind of got on the map during the Islamic Revolution, and over the years, which by the way, at that time, the move that the Grand Ayatollah Khomeini made electrified all Muslims in the Middle East, in Muslim countries, thinking that he was 78. So here's an older theologian who's coming back and bringing religion back to a country that, from his point of view, as well as those who were not very happy with the Shah, who's bringing it back and taking us back to those values that religion represented for them. And Iran has obviously a long history, but back in 1935, when the name changed from Persia to Iran, the reason for that, by the way, was Hitler's rise to power, and Germany was, viewed as a world superpower, and in order to align itself with the world superpower as perceived at that time, the king of Iran, who's the Shah's father, changed the name from Persia to Iran, which means land of Aryans. So that was his way of doing it. And of course, it's been Iran ever since. Iran got a bad name. There were some bad things happening in the name of religion, and that is the other thing that I guess I had hoped to communicate in this story, is that I am not anti-religion. In fact, I think religion can be a very good thing, a positive force to bring us together in times of need, to help us to congregate, to believe in the same things and be there for each other. So it has some very positive effects, but religion, when taken to extremes, can be destructive, can be painful, can be hurtful. And so I think it's important to distinguish between religious fundamentalism and religion. So there are Muslim zealots who put on suicide vests, who go out and kill other people in the name of religion. But that's true across other religions. How many abortion clinic bombings do we know of? What about Waco? What about Jonestown? Those are fundamentalist beliefs that have caused damage and in some cases destruction to people. So it's good to distinguish between the two. So that was another message that I guess I wanted to convey. So I grew up in a country where we had people from all religions. The Persian religion originally, by the way, was Zoroastrianism. And it was in the 7th century that the Arab takeover of, imposing, bringing in Islam to Persia took place. So there were, and there still are, people who believed in Zoroaster around the world, but obviously concentrated in Iran. We had Jews, we had Christians, we had, we called them Armenians, but Armenians were really Greek Orthodox. We had Baha'is. These were the primary religions. There were others. And we all lived happily together. The only religion that I must say that there was prejudice against in Iran, even during the time that I was there, was for the Baha'is. So we had, and still today in Iran, there are 650 churches, there are 35 synagogues. These folks are allowed and respected for their religions, and I might add, in case you're not familiar, back when I was in Iran in the 60s, 70s, there were about 35,000 Jews who lived in Iran, who were born, and this was their home. And in fact, it's the second largest diaspora outside of Jerusalem was in Iran, which is something that people don't really necessarily connect to because of the image and public words that have described Iranians as being, and Muslims as being anti-Jewish. So back then that wasn't the case. Now the number of people of all of these faiths has reduced since the Islamic Revolution took place. But Baha'is were the ones that were always discriminated against. And the reason for that is that Muslims believe that all the other religions, by the way, that there is respect for those. They believe in Jesus and they believe in all prophets before that. But the belief is that Muhammad came last. Therefore, he is God's last messenger and has the most recent, the freshest messages. And that people should believe in those messages as opposed to the prior ones. So that's the idea. But Baha'ism was born after Muhammad, and so Iranians had problems. The government primarily had problems. We grew up. We had Santa Claus. We had Christmas trees. Not necessarily in our home, because I was born in a Muslim family, as most of Iran, 99% of Iranians are Muslim. So there's no escaping that, of course. But then the rest were people of all faiths, our neighbors, our coworkers, our kids at school. We all lived and worked and danced at the prom together. We had all of that. Things changed So when I finished high school, in 1976, I came to the U.S. to go to college, and it was in college that things started to break down. I went home after my freshman year, I went home for the summer, and there were some uprisings in the smaller villages, and they were starting martial law in those villages, and I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get back out, come back to school. But fortunately I did, and it wasn't too long after that uprisings got larger, and they happened in Tehran. Therefore then Tehran was under martial law, so I was very fortunate that I got out and back in school. So one of my friends, my best friend that I had grown up with, that I had spent most of my childhood with, was going to Brown University, and I was going to Lehigh University. Anyone who's from the East Coast would be familiar with those schools. So she came to visit me one weekend. This is after the revolution. And of course, once that started, I didn't want to go back because I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to get back out. She came to visit me. We had a good old time over the weekend, and then she went back to school, and I was, there was no email, there were no personal phones back then. It was just letter and then calling the big phone in the dorm hallway. So at some point I tried calling her, and they said, she's gone. I said, what do you mean she's gone? She left, she went back to Iran. I was very upset because this had been my best friend. I said, well, okay, I'm hurt. She didn't even say goodbye to me, and I had no way to reach her because telephone calls to Iran were pretty difficult to make at the time. If you got through, you also had to watch what you said, so I didn't want to, so she was lost on me. No one knew where she was. But I was in school, focused on my studies, boys, beer, all that. By the way, the ratio of men to women at the time at Lehigh University was 10 to 1. So it was a good place to but anyway, so that ended, and of course, time can cause you to forget things and people. Not that I ever forgot about my friend, but there were other things to do. I graduated, I moved to Chicago for my first job. I got married, I have kids, I have a career, which by the way was in IT. Over the years I published 4 IT books, so that I was busy doing that, raising a family. So, all this revolution is happening. At some point in my life, I met Jerry. Jerry is currently a photographer. Anyway, to fast forward, Jerry and I got married, and we lived in Chicago, so kind of cold there. That whole Canadian polar vortex started coming our way, and we took the Christmas holidays, and every Christmas we would take two weeks and go somewhere warm in Caribbean. During one of those times, we were on the beach and came across some folks who invited us. They were from Iran, and they invited us to a dinner party while we were still on the island, and that's when the shock of my life happened. I sometimes get emotional when I reach this point of the story, so I'm going to try not to, because I want to express this so that you can understand that the day that I found out, and this was, I found out that my friend had been arrested, jailed, beaten, raped, and that's why she wasn't there when I tried to find her. That's why I couldn't reach her. Meanwhile, I was having my good old life, my career, my family. I had no idea that during this time she had been suffering at the hands of what I call religious fundamentalists. And she had committed no crime, but they wanted her father. Her father had been associated with the Shah, and of course, when the Islamic Revolution happened, the mullahs came in and they, executed many of those who were associated with the Shah. So I decided I wanted to tell the story because I wanted to give a voice to how the Islamic Revolution, how the religious figures who took over my country decided to use religion as a way to impose their will, to gain political power. It was about power and money and imposing what they really wanted, which meant a lot of rights were taken away from many people, but primarily from women. Meanwhile, the side story here is that, as I was thinking about, the plot and writing this, I would sometimes talk with Jerry and, bounce ideas off of him. And, here we are in the backyard, talking about this. And I'd say, I remember the very first time that my college girlfriend, my college roommate actually said, let's go on a boat, and she goes, and I put on a pair of pants and a t-shirt. She goes, don't you have shorts? And I said, yeah. She goes, well, you gotta put on shorts. We're going on a boat. Well, I felt so uncomfortable the whole time, because that was the first time, except for when you were in the gym, that I had put on shorts. So Jerry says, well, in the community where I live, shorts were forbidden too. So some of you, many of you already know that a little bit about Jerry's background. He lived in a Catholic cult right here in the United States for 20 years. So we started to exchange these stories, and I would say, well, I was describing this religious ceremony on the day of the death of Imam Hussein. The commemoration was people would get in the streets and they would take these chains, these metal chains, and they would self-flagellate. He goes, well, the same is true, in our religion. And he started to tell me about some of the things that he had experienced as he lived in this community and why he decided to leave it. We realized that, again, back to my point of, we are from two different parts of the world. We even speak different languages. Right, Jerry? And different religions, religious influences, traditions, all of that, and yet we really are so alike. So that's when I decided to weave in the story and put some of, so Jack in the story is modeled somewhat after Jerry and his life and his experiences, to try and draw the similarities as opposed to the contrasts between people. How are we doing on time? We're good. I wanna tell you about some of the things that happened in Iran though. I did make a trip right before I decided to get married. I wanted to go back home, and by now the religious fervor had quieted down a little bit. It had become more ordinary, more everyday for those who were there. It wasn't for me, and I have lots of stories to tell about that, but I wanted to go home to see my family before I got married, because I knew that if a Muslim man marries a non-Muslim woman, it is a crime that's punishable, lashes. But if a woman marries a non-Muslim man, it is a crime that's punishable by death. So I thought it'd be nice to go so that I can see my country one last time. But subsequent to that, without going into the details, we actually did go back, Jerry as well as my sons, we went back to Iran. So a lot of the things that I write in the book is from firsthand experience. The dress code clearly changed. I could no longer dress like this. In fact, when I was on the airplane, I knew I had to take, if you are out in public, you have to wear either a chador. In Iran, they don't wear burqas, and this is what's interesting. So you've got to distinguish between the countries in the Middle East. But they don't wear burqas there, but they wear a chador, which covers you from head to toe. But at the time, so I could wear a headscarf and something that would be loose fitting. There are actually businesses in Iran and in the Middle East that make these things. They look like a cloak, basically, so that you don't see the outline or the shape of a woman's body, because that can be destructive. We won't go there. So tempting for some. So I happen to have a raincoat, and I just went to Ann Taylor and bought myself a nice little silk scarf and put it on. And I'm sorry, I meant to say I didn't put it on on the airplane, because we were going through Switzerland. I was fine, but at some point on the plane, the pilot announced that we are now in Iranian airspace. Ladies, feel free to put on your Islamic clothing. And all these women got up, and they're overhead compartment, and they're putting on their things, and I'm like, okay, I'll do the same. I'm by myself, right? So I did that. So the rest of the trip on the plane, I had to be dressed that way, and so did the flight attendants, by the way. Swiss Airlines, blonde hair underneath the thing, we all dressed that way. So the imposition of the dress code was one thing that I really had difficulty with, but that's the way it was. You do not go out in public unless you're covered from head to toe. When the Shah took power, I think it was 1957. By 1963, he made a lot of changes to the country to westernize Iran, and it was dubbed the White Revolution. Among those things, he said, take off the scarf, but also change the legal marrying age, which was 13 to 18. He gave women the right to vote. He introduced laws to limit polygamy. He gave women the right to ask for a divorce, and to also take custody of children in the case of divorce. All things that we think is normal, but it was very progressive. Well, that angered a lot of big clerics. But now fast forward to here we are, the Islamic Revolution, the Ayatollah has come in, and they pretty much one by one took everything back. In fact, the legal marrying age was changed to 9. And the reason for that, I know that the look of horror is because for us it's unconscionable, but the interpretation of the Sharia law, and Sharia law is really the human edifice of what the laws of Islam are supposed to be, and it is, you can't change it, but it's subject to interpretation. And so the mullahs said, well, it says in the Quran that a girl of 9 has achieved puberty, therefore she's of marrying age. Later, by the way, the age was raised to 13, and it remains 13, even now. So that was one of the things that changed. There was, women where there were 22, I think, somewhere in that number, women in parliament under the Shah's rule. There were women in powerful positions in government with very respectful jobs, with real jobs, I might add. And then during the Islamic Revolution, women were discouraged disqualified, and lost. So the employment rate for women went from somewhere around 13 to around 8, because women were being discouraged from working outside the home. They changed, so a woman's vote counts as half of that of a man. So it takes 2 women's votes to equal 1 of a man. So if there's a document to be signed, and if it's a woman who signs it, you need 2 in order for it to be valid. They changed, so travel. I was not restricted to travel, even as, of course, being a minor maybe, but women could travel where they wanted to. Under this new regime, women had to, have to still either get their father's permission if they're unmarried, or their husband's permission if they are married, if they want to travel outside the country. And of course, we were relegated to the back of the bus. So during a trip that we took to Tehran, in an effort to show us, so the bazaar is in the southern part of Tehran, and of course, who doesn't want to go to the bazaar? It's part of the Middle Eastern culture, and I wanted to go buy some goodies and just see what it was like. And I wanted Jerry and my sons to see it too. So they had, because of heavy traffic and pollution, private cars were no longer allowed, so we had to take public transportation. And we go to board the bus that was near our home, and I'm following my dad, okay? He knows what he's doing. And he goes to get on the bus, and he's like, well, you gotta go in the back. And I'm like, what? So, my mother and I, and the boys, we had to go to the back of the bus and board the bus from the back door, while my father and Jerry, and Jerry, they couldn't come in the back, you understand, they had to be in the front. So we get on there, and there's a metal rail, so they had retrofitted the buses with this metal railing to create that separation. I guess I don't need to tell you how livid I was, and actually that was a very difficult experience for me, because I was born and raised by my parents, including my father, to think that I was no less than anyone else. I'm equal to everyone. And so this was really, really difficult for me. So I think I've said, enough to help you understand the premise of the book and the background. What I'd like to do, if I may, is just do a couple of things that I have in the book that I want to read to you. Because I think we call this a book reading, and I don't want to lie. So, this is something that my dad actually told me. There was a cousin, and my cousin, so interestingly, I was, my parents' side, one was much more progressive and Western. My mother's side, they didn't wear veils, they didn't go to the mosque, My father's side, on the other hand, all the ladies wore the chadors, and if we went to a wedding, men and women were separated. So I grew up kind of caught between these 2 worlds. And managing through that was at times as a kid kind of hard. But the cousin in this story is having difficulties with the fact that he learns that my dad was saying, you want to go to the US to go to college, that's okay, it's your choice. So conversation pursues, and of course, I as a teenager was mad. And my dad said, he's a devout Muslim. Remember, under Islamic law, you don't have the same rights as a man. Your father or husband makes choices for you. That's exactly why I told him it was your decision. I want Mujtaba, cousin, to know in no uncertain terms that you have a mind of your own as well as my blessing. Remember, daughter, you don't open a mind by beating it down. You must raise it to the light. held up his hands towards the ceiling. A good lesson for a teenager. I was 17. I'd be happy to read parts of what I wrote about the whole premise of religious fundamentalism, but I won't, in favor of, I'd like to kind of open this up to, because I think, rather than talking anymore, you'll ask questions and I get to talk some more, so it's all good. Before I do that though, I did want to mention that I am working on a sequel to this book. I know, Anne, I just, first I was seduced by golf, I should have done this. And that has lost its thing now, I just need to really get working on it and finish it. I am on the 4th version of the manuscript now. The working title is Martyrs Don't Die. What I wanted to do is, I've taken some of the same characters into the second book and carried them through to the year 2007, when there was another revolution that took place in Iran, where the Iranian people had had enough of the religious clerics and wanted to overthrow the regime, but they were squashed. And it was called the Women's Revolution at the time. So I thought it was very appropriate for me to kind of bring the characters into that era. It is also going to be a novel, but it's also based on some real people that I know who rose to power in the government of Iran and pursues. The plot is still possibly going to shift, so we'll see by time. With the first book, by the way, I wrote 13 versions of the manuscript before we finally finished, so I'm on number 4 now. So that's it. Again, there's so much more I can cover, but I want to just kind of open it up to see if you guys have any questions.